Passage 1, Fiction, The Rescue Mission. Lila noticed the puppy because it did not run. Most dogs at Pine Ridge State Park stayed close to their owners. They trotted beside hiking boots, strained at leashes, or vanished briefly behind a tree before someone called them back. This puppy stood alone below the trail, half hidden among wet ferns. Its fur was the color of honey, though the rain had darkened it along its back and ears. "Mom!" Lila said, stopping so suddenly that Max bumped into her backpack. "There's a dog down there." The mother stepped beside her and followed Lila's pointing hand. The puppy lifted one front paw, held it close to its chest for a second, then set it down without putting any weight on it. Near the puppy, a thin strip of blue fabric had snagged on a thorn bush. "Oh, sweetheart," Mom murmured. The puppy stared at them with wide, uncertain eyes. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the ridge, low enough that Lila felt it more than heard it. At the sound, the puppy turned and limped deeper into the trees. "Wait!" Lila called, taking a step toward the muddy slope. Dad caught the top of her backpack before she could slide down it. "Not down there. The ground is slick." "But it's hurt." Lila twisted around to face him. "You saw its paw." "I did," Mom said. She looked toward the trees where the puppy had disappeared. "We'll tell the ranger when we get back to the trailhead." Lila wanted to keep arguing. The puppy had not looked lost in the ordinary way dogs sometimes did, sniffing around with an owner nearby, too interested in a rabbit trail to listen. It had looked frightened. Still, the rain was beginning to fall harder, and wet leaves had turned the trail beneath her shoes into something that slid instead of held. Max had moved close behind Dad, his rain jacket brushing against Dad's backpack. He did not say anything, but Lila knew he hated the woods when the weather changed. Last summer, he had gotten turned around near a trail marker and had cried until Dad found him less than 5 minutes later. As they headed toward the trailhead, Lila kept thinking about the blue fabric caught in the thorns. It had not looked like a ribbon. It had looked like part of a collar. At the ranger station, Mom described what they had seen while Dad shook rain from their jackets near the doorway. Ranger Holt listened without interrupting. Then he unfolded a map across the counter and marked the creek trail with one finger. "We've had a report of a missing puppy from the campground," he said. "My partner is checking the north side of the park now." "Then it could still be near the creek trail," Lila said. She leaned closer to the map, trying to picture where the puppy might have gone. "It could," Ranger Holt agreed, "but daylight is fading and the trails are muddy. Everyone who is searching needs to stay in contact." Dad rested a hand on Lila's shoulder. "He knows where to look." Lila nodded because she knew that was what Dad expected. Still, the tight feeling in her chest did not ease. Ranger Holt knew where to look, but he had not seen the puppy standing alone in the rain. He had not seen the way it had held up its paw. A few minutes later, Dad went outside to pull the truck closer to the porch. Mom stayed inside to ask Ranger Holt whether the campground family had brought a photograph of the puppy. Max stood beside Lila beneath the awning, kicking at a wet pebble near the edge of the concrete. "You're still thinking about it," he said. "It was limping." Ranger Holt said somebody's looking. "On the other side of the park." Lila stared toward the woods behind the station. Rainwater slipped from the roof in steady drops, darkening the pavement below. "What if it came back this way?" Max did not answer right away. He looked toward the tree line, then back toward the ranger station door. His hand tightened around one strap of his backpack. A faint sound drifted through the rain. Lila straightened. The sound came again, thin and uneven, almost swallowed by the wind. "That was a puppy?" she whispered. Max's eyes widened. "We should tell Ranger Holt." "We can see where it is first." Lila pointed toward the narrow service trail behind the building. "We'll stay close enough to see the station." "You always say that when you want to go farther." Lila turned toward him, ready to argue. But Max was not trying to be difficult. His face had gone pale, and he kept looking toward the trees as though he expected something to move between them. Then the whimper came again. Max took a slow breath. "We stay where we can still see the station," he said, "and if it's farther than that, we come back." The service trail was little more than packed gravel bordered by pine needles and wet brush. Water dripped from branches above them, tapping against leaves and stones. Lila moved slowly, listening for the sound again. She could feel Max behind her, close enough that she heard his shoes scrape against the gravel whenever he took a careful step. Near a low branch, he stopped. "Blue," he said. A torn piece of fabric clung to the bark. Lila crouched beside it. The material was muddy, but the color was unmistakable. "It came this way," she said. The trail curved around a cluster of fallen trees. Beyond them, the ground sloped toward a shallow creek bed swollen by rain. The ranger station was still visible through the trunks, but it looked smaller now, partly hidden by the branches. "Lila," Max said quietly, "that's far enough." Before she could answer, the puppy cried again. They found it near the edge of the creek beneath a fallen branch. One front paw was trapped under the limb, mud had soaked through its fur, and its eyes darted wildly when Lila stepped closer. The creek rushed only a few feet away, carrying leaves and small sticks past the rocks. "We found it," Lila breathed. She dropped to her knees beside the branch. The puppy pulled weakly against the limb, then flinched when Lila reached toward it. "We need to lift this carefully," Lila said. She placed both hands against the wet wood and tested its weight. The branch barely shifted. Max stayed near the edge of the creek bed, watching the puppy's teeth flash each time it struggled. "What if it bites you?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it was not shaky in the way it had been earlier. He sounded as though he were trying to notice everything at once: the rushing water, the slick mud, the branch, and the puppy's frightened movements. "It's scared," Lila replied. She pushed harder, but her palms slipped against the rain-darkened bark. The puppy cried out again. Max stepped closer, then stopped beside her. "So are you," he said. "So are you," he said. "That doesn't mean you have to pretend you know what to do." Near a low branch, he stopped. "Blue," he said. A torn piece of fabric clung to the bark. Lila crouched beside it. The material was muddy, but the color was unmistakable. "It came this way," she said. The trail curved around a cluster of fallen trees. Beyond them, the ground sloped toward a shallow creek bed swollen by rain. The ranger station was still visible through the trunks, but it looked smaller now, partly hidden by the branches. "Lila," Max said quietly, "that's far enough." Before she could answer, the puppy cried again. They found it near the edge of the creek beneath a fallen branch. One front paw was trapped under the limb. Mud had soaked through its fur, and its eyes darted wildly when Lila stepped closer. The creek rushed only a few feet away, carrying leaves and small sticks past the rocks. "We found it," Lila breathed. She dropped to her knees beside the branch. The puppy pulled weakly against the limb, then flinched when Lila reached toward it. "We need to lift this carefully," Lila said. She placed both hands against the wet wood and tested its weight. The branch barely shifted. Max stayed near the edge of the creek bed, watching the puppy's teeth flash each time it struggled. "What if it bites you?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it was not shaky in the way it had been earlier. He sounded as though he were trying to notice everything at once: the rushing water, the slick mud, the branch, and the puppy's frightened movements. "It's scared," Lila replied. She pushed harder, but her palms slipped against the rain-darkened bark. The puppy cried out again. Max stepped closer, then stopped beside her. "So are you," he said. "That doesn't mean you have to pretend you know what to do." For a moment, Lila wanted to snap at him. Every second they waited felt wrong. But when she looked down again, she saw what Max had seen. The branch was heavier than it looked, and the puppy jerked whenever she moved too quickly. Trying harder would not make the rescue safer. Her fingers closed around the silver whistle hanging from her backpack strap. Their parents had made both children carry one whenever they hiked, though Lila had always thought of it as something adults worried about, not something she would actually need. "We can call Ranger Holt," Max said. He pulled off his jacket and held it low between the puppy and the wind. "We don't have to do everything ourselves." Lila lifted the whistle to her mouth and blew 3 sharp notes. The sound cut through the rain, carrying farther than her voice ever could. While they waited, Max kept his jacket between the puppy and the wind without touching the animal. Lila spoke softly, her hands still trembling from the effort of trying to lift the branch. "It's okay," she said. "We're here." Within minutes, Ranger Holt came down the trail with Dad close behind him. Dad's face was tight with worry, but he did not raise his voice. Ranger Holt knelt beside the branch, studied the puppy's paw, and signaled for Dad to help. "You two did the right thing by calling for help," he said. "Now step back and let's make sure we do this safely." Dad lifted one end of the branch, while Ranger Holt shifted the other. As soon as there was enough room, the puppy scrambled backward and limped onto Max's jacket. Lila released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Ranger Holt wrapped the puppy in a dry blanket and checked the blue collar. A scratched metal tag hung beneath the buckle. "Looks like we know who belongs to this little explorer," he said. At the ranger station, the puppy's owners arrived less than 10 minutes later. A little girl in a yellow raincoat dropped beside the blanket and wrapped both arms around the puppy's neck. Her father thanked Ranger Holt, then thanked Lila and Max until Lila felt heat rise into her cheeks. For a few minutes, the relief of seeing the puppy safe made everything else seem smaller. Then Dad said, "Lila, Max, come outside with us." His voice was calm, which made Lila's stomach tighten more than yelling would have. Under the awning, rainwater slipped from the roof in steady lines. Mom stood with her arms crossed. Not angry exactly, but worried in a way that made Lila wish she could explain everything at once. "I know you wanted to help," Dad said, "and I am glad you used the whistle when you realized the puppy needed more help than you could give." Lila looked down at her muddy shoes. She waited for the rest. "But you left the ranger station without telling us," Mom continued. "We did not know where you were. The trails were wet, the light was fading, and we could have been searching for you too." "We heard it," Lila said. The words came out sharper than she intended. Nobody else heard it. Dad nodded once. "That may be true, but hearing it did not mean you had to handle it alone." "It needed help," Lila said. She glanced toward the station window where the puppy had curled against its owner's boots. "What was I supposed to do? Just stand there?" "No," Mom said. Her voice softened. "You were supposed to tell an adult what you heard. Caring about the puppy was the right instinct. Leaving without permission was not." Lila wanted to argue that both things had happened at the same time, that the puppy had needed help and that she had helped it, but she remembered the branch slipping beneath her hands. She remembered how quickly the situation could have become worse. Dad looked at both children. "For the rest of the weekend, neither of you goes anywhere beyond the campsite or trail without an adult. And, Lila, you lose your phone tonight and tomorrow." The consequence felt unfair, even though Lila understood why it existed. She folded her arms against the damp cold and said nothing. "You can be upset about it," Dad told her, "but you can still understand why it happened." As they walked toward the truck, Max moved beside her until their sleeves brushed. "You were right," he said. "It needed help." Lila looked back once at the ranger station. "And you were right, too." "About what?" "That helping doesn't mean breaking every rule." Max thought about that as they crossed the wet parking lot. "Maybe it means knowing when to get help before things get worse." Lila nodded. Ahead of them, the forest stretched